Today I want to talk about scrying using psychedelics. I thought I'd start off by telling you the results of my research into the meaning of scrying. I went on Wikipedia and copied out what it said. Scrying. Scrying is the practice of looking into a suitable medium in the hope of detecting significant messages or visions. There is no definitive distinction between scrying and other aids to clairvoyance, augury, or divination, but roughly speaking, scrying depends on fancied impressions of visions in the medium of choice. Scrying has been practiced in many cultures in the belief that it can reveal the past, present, or future. Some practitioners assert that visions that come when one stares into the media are from the subconscious or imagination, while others say that they come from gods, spirits, devils, or the psychic mind, depending on the culture and practice. There is neither any systematic body of empirical support for any such views in general, however, nor for their respective rival merits. Individual preferences in such matters are arbitrary at best. So there we go. So it's about looking into a collection of stuff and then seeing what visions then come to mind from that. But what happens when our medium of choice, instead of it being focused down into just being crystals or water or tea leaves or whatever the divinatory tool might be, what happens if we decide that we want to use the present moment as our thing to scry into? Hello, thank you for coming here now. I'm Nikki Wyrd. This is the collection of syllables that I've chosen to be referred to as, which is to say, this part of the universe, currently manifesting as what appears to be a discrete object, is signified by those sound waves. The habit of seeing things as things, moving through empty space and then encountering each other, has value as an efficient conceptual tool. It means that I can pick up this paper because I can conceptualize of those things as two separate objects. It's much easier than going into the sort of the deeper levels of stuff. And I is an interesting thing to go into as well. I, the actual word that we use in our language as signifying the person speaking, doesn't exist in some languages. There are some that have to use other phrases instead. We use it all the time, and we know that it points back to the person saying it. I like that because it helps to affirm the commonality of each of us as a part of the universe, manifesting here and now with bodies, minds, awareness, distinct openings of consciousness. But as one looks closer, the pixels blur, and we are analog waves. Essentially, everything is essentially variations on a theme, ripples in quantum foam. Everything, including each person here, arises from that initial Big Bang moment. So all the helium atoms, and they just gradually become more and more complex. But we're all essentially, if you look down at the quantum level, it's all quarks and those tiny little things. It's all just collections, nexuses in those waves. There is no separation between the things except conceptually. Language is two-dimensional. Sounds follow one after another. Discrete packages of audio arrive from here to here, creating a linear narrative. This means that language has to build in 2 dimensions, and then the hearer reconstructs it into a 3-dimensional conceptual shape. So I'm talking today about the way that psychedelics help us to scry. I'm being a bit poetic, so you have to sort of like, at the end of this talk, hopefully some of these things will impress together and make up some kind of shape, is my hope from this. And I'd just like you to listen while I just read out a description of a vision that I had. After preparing the area, by tidying the room and getting the things together that I needed in it, I greet the spirits of the medicine. I ask them to see things to help me understand what I should talk about at breaking convention. Inhale. Closed eyes, a room with geometric 3D forms hanging in space within it, rich colours and textures of browns, ochres, oranges and reds. Each form is inscribed with letters and punctuation, each with glowing outline. The room they float in... This one? Okay. The room they float in has carpets on the floor and shuttered windows with low tables and objects obviously made by people rather than machines. It is a room which could exist in any culture, any time, past, present, future, anywhere on the planet. Open eyes. The room I am in takes on the appearance of a graphic novel image, with each edge delineated with a precise definition. Planes of colour on the walls are immaculate and flawless. Objects stand out from their background. The leaves of the plants in the jug are crisp. The spatial awareness represented in my visual field as if I have donned 3D glasses. A pamphlet from Cosmic Trigger, the play, shimmers with significance. And I see the future, not as a high-tech city of virtual farms, my usual vision, but from within. Inside those towers are rooms just like those we have long constructed, comfortable, decorated with craft, lit by low flames. Seeing the future so literally is the theme of this paper. While it is possible to get a feel for the worlds we want to build by thinking about them intellectually, or by looking at artists' impressions, nothing is so helpful as seeing from within. Close your eyes and transport yourself to that future. Immersive technologies, thousands of years old. DMT containing seeds found next to a pipe in a cave in South America date back to thousands of years ago. The visions seen by those people, wasted high in the Andes, doubtlessly contain similar biologically constrained features as my own visions regularly do. Edge detectors in my visual system, colour receiving cells in my eyes, shapes and textures hardwired into the neurology of me as an animal, since long before I stood upright. I mention this expanded perspective on my experience as it would be foolish to ignore the fact that the part of the universe currently speaking to you is merely a node in the network of life. The parts that make up this apparent individual are the products of billions of years of process. I'm a version, a remix of the whole line which has experienced the world before me. So the way I see, the way I respond to substances and sights is going to be pretty much identical to the way others related to me do. So those people wasted in the cave in the Andes, they would have had that similar, like, graphic novel, high-tech, and exactly how they would have perceived, because they wouldn't have had that analogy, I don't know how they would have perceived that, maybe as flowers or something like that, but it would have been very otherworldly to them. And that often makes me pause and think, you know, how did it look like the future to them, or another world, or the past, or how did they conceive of this, like, other way of seeing things that's very sort of smoothed out with, like, crisp edges? Once I had a vision of a city of the future. I started flying across a landscape full of trees, a forest, vast and green. I saw a scene approaching of structures which looked unfamiliar. They were grown from carbon, frames twisting in homage to plant and shell shapes, strong yet minimal, lifting their contents to the light above the trees. A cluster of these structures sat happily within the trees, a sense of homeliness and creativity. I saw that these cities were replicated around the planet, far apart, and variable in 1,000 ways to suit their particular habitat, climate, and the aesthetics of their inhabitants. Yet despite the distances, the isolation between these people was non-existent. Communication was easy and common, travel not impossible, and achieved by flight, so removing the need for roads. Humans had reduced their numbers and were no longer a burden on the ecosystem. Consciously and fully taking up their role as ecosystem engineers successfully, and as they did in the Amazon long ago, working to enhance diversity. I don't know how much you know about the Amazonian culture of the Terra Preta cultures, where the idea is that the Amazonian jungle is not actually virgin in any sense whatsoever, but is in fact the result of centuries of very intensive gardening, which we would call it, rather than farming. And that's, I think, a really good example of how, I'm going to use these words, but I don't like it, nature and humans, because they are actually the same thing, about how those two things can in fact magnify and help each other. There were millions of people living in that area for a long, long time, and the way that the cities and the groups of people were set up in sort of like pockets with gardens all around them, and throughout the cities, a lot of them were water floating gardens. It was incredibly productive. If we gardened instead of farmed and did permacultural type of things, we can have much more productive stuff going on. And also there's not so much need for transporting stuff around. Anyway, that's another thing. Today, there are many communities emerging from the hands-on creators of our times, those who make. maker spaces. At least a few of the instigators of these places have been motivated by psychedelic experiences, not least in the way they have been organised as emergent phenomena. This is something that for me is really important about psychedelics, is that you quite often you go into your trip or whatever you want to call it, and you're not planning what you're going to do. You just go into it and see what happens. But you can flavour that by setting up the set of yourself, the setting of your environment, and also by choosing which psychedelic substance to take. So you do that, and then you just see what emerges from that. And it's quite nice to have different possibilities of what those things might be. And I think people that are used to that tend to organise their lives and gatherings in that way. Breaking convention itself is an emergent phenomena of the things that we bring to it in advance, our planning and the objects that we bring to it. But then what happens is just what happens at the time. Yeah?
Definitely.
So often also psychedelics provoke a reappraisal of what can I really see here and now. And we tend to sort of stop and go, well, what does this thing that you might not have even noticed on the wall or a flyer that's lying around, you look at it and go, oh, I've never really noticed that before. And that is often followed by the obvious question of, what do I really want to see? Is this thing that I'm seeing here, is that what I was searching for from the things that are going on inside my head? But this is a different kind of visionary statement, what do I really want to see? Open-ended and provocative, starting from the immediate in front of you scene, as well as that flyover perspective covering vast swathes of space-time. Why do we need to see the future from the perspective of the first person? Immersive imaginings may well prove more emotive, much as first-person shoot-'em-up games, when played within a virtual reality medium, leave participants deeply shaken by the experience. It's one thing having a screen in front of you and having your pretend gun and shooting at it, but if you're actually in the fully immersive virtual reality world where you feel like you're actually there, it's much more like a real situation, and people come out of it even when they're really used to that kind of thing, and they're really visibly shaken and they just don't enjoy doing it because they feel like the other people that are the pictures on the screen are real, and it's much harder for them to escape the fact that they are shooting people. It's very difficult to escape from. It's that emotive quality which I think is important from immersive experiences, which is the kind of thing that you get when you're visioning things on psychedelics. You can't really escape from it in the same kind of way as if you're just going, oh, I wonder what I'll be doing when I'm walking down the street. If you're actually in that it's not even a helmet, but if you're in that world of, because it also covers all of your other senses, not just the sight. And if you're actually in that and seeing this future world, which is coming to you from wherever it is, whether it's, according to Wikipedia, psychic mind, gods, devils, whatever. When you're seeing those things, they feel very tangible, very real. Sometimes you can even physically sort of feel like you're interacting with them when you're on very high doses. The world that you're in becomes overlaid by the thing that you're seeing, and you might pick up something which is a cup, but you're seeing it as like a really important thing made out of so instead of it being just a papery cup, it might turn into something made out of beautiful porcelain. Yeah, and the whole thing becomes very confusing at the time because you're seeing objects as things that they aren't really. So that level of being able to transport yourself or receive messages from, however you want to view it, a different thing, is really much more powerful emotively, because it's not just your visual, intellectual self that's engaging with it, you're feeling those things. And for me, that's really, really important about the way that my descendants are going to see things and being able to connect with that. We can know as a factual, abstract piece of knowledge that the future will happen, but seeing the future as if it were as real as today makes it exist in a far more relatable way. I can know that my descendants will exist in a world shaped by the consequences of my actions today, but if I'm able to see through their eyes this landscape of forests at evening time, seen from the point of view of a passenger in an aircraft floating across the tree canopy, seeing clearings of light and structures grown from carbon, twisting like vines into geodesic designs, towering upwards with smoke curling up from the evening fires. Sounds and smells of people cooking and eating and laughing rise with the smoke. The wind on my skin is cooling. I pull the thick, light, multicoloured, cosy shawl around my shoulders. I feel at ease. This is no new sight. This is normality, is how that particular vision emerged. To achieve that, I had set the intention of scrying, seeing in the confluence of patterns and objects around me a narrative of a possible future world. As well as being an avid psychonaut, I spent most of my life doing magical practices because I enjoy those too. And for me, scrying is an essential part of the magical practice because that's where I began. I come from a family. My great-grandmother has had a crystal ball, which is now mine. My grandmother used to read tea leaves and cards for her friends. So I got into doing magic and occult practices and being interested in that originally from scrying with tea leaves, beads thrown out onto a blanket, things like that, just seeing patterns in and learning about bird signs, sky shapes, things like that. And then I got into tarot reading and then more into the occult type of stuff. And that's when I discovered that you could cast spells. So by deciding what you're going to pay attention to, which vision of the future you want to happen, you can pull that, you can be, by focusing your attention, you can be pulled towards that future. It's a bit of a sort of slippery thing because language falls down when trying to describe such things, so I'm just trying to give you slight pointers towards it. So, while I'm not trying to get you all to be occultists, I think it still works that when you're using psychedelics and trying to see the future that you want your descendants and yourself or the other people that come after you and the other animals that come after you and the plants that come after you, those pieces of the universe that would refer to themselves as I, if they had language and spoke English, they are you. You're all seeing to be able to connect with those things, to see as a flower or as a part of the ground, which also happens when you're on quite high doses of psychedelics, particularly things like salvia and stuff like that. I'm seeing a couple of nods. If you can understand that emotive connection, that you are part of this massive continuum of different things on a scale, then you're much more likely to act in ways that will have consequences that are kind to these other things. And I think that that's where drugs are particularly useful, because they can allow you to have that, you have to sort of suspend your belief of the normal type of things that you would think, and you can pretend and play with those ideas while you're in those states. Downstairs today in the reception area we've got some Psychedelic stuff going on. You can try out different virtual reality and augmented reality things, so I'd certainly recommend that because it's connected to some of the things I'm exploring here. I'm not saying for sure because I don't know all of the people down there, but I'm pretty sure that some of them might have been inspired by psychedelic experiences, both in how they organise their stuff and also what they do within it. So that would be a way of sort of checking this out. If anyone's not an actual psychedelic taker here, which I'm sure there are plenty of, then that's a good way of seeing just how an immersive technology, which I'm using psychedelics as an immersive technology within the scope of this talk, that's a good sort of entry point to seeing how directly it can affect your perceptions of other things. And if you can imagine being in a place where you're seeing through the eyes of a person in another part of the world and you're walking around their village, you can understand why it's so important that the things that we do in how our culture is organised affect those other things in that other country. And we know that, but to be in a place where they can look around and show you how it is, it's as if you're there. And I think that that kind of technology we're on the brink of achieving now. And that's the kind of stuff that really excites me about some of the virtual reality technologies. And I believe there's a term, moistware, which refers to the use of VR and AR technology at the same time as different psychedelic substances, usually at lower doses, because otherwise it would get far too overwhelming. And I think combining those two things is a way of really just like having some amazing possibilities of connecting with other people in all of the countries throughout the world and really having that deep emotional, heartfelt, I'm here with you connection, and likewise for them to be us. We had this vision when we were talking the other day about breaking convention in the future. There's a couple of people that weren't able to attend in person, so they're here remotely using Skype. And we've actually got a little robot which has got a little sort of panel on the top of it. James Fadiman is going to be the robot later on, Jimbot. Yeah, so we were envisaging a future where we could have like a conference with just loads of robots wandering around, so no one would actually have to do the travelling for things. It would be much easier, much easier.
In years to come, the group photo will be like, there'll be more and more robots appearing and less people.
Or maybe drones. It might be drones by that point. We might have drones that would be able to fly around and talk to each other. We'll still have to hire somewhere as well, because otherwise it wouldn't be a conference. It wouldn't be the same. So I hope that's sort of given you some of the sort of things. It's a bit sort of sketchy, like I say, because I've been A, very ill, and B, very busy organising this for you wonderful people, which is my absolute pleasure, so thank you for that. So I'd just like to finish with my last paragraph. And I'd like you to close your eyes and see a room with carpets on the floor, beautifully crafted objects, a dry shelter within which we can find others to talk with under warm lights in the evening. The provision of this, perhaps, is the touchstone by which we can measure the success of our cultures. Thank you very much.